Awesome. Yeah, I think we could get started as people straggle in. So again, thank you everybody for attending. Today we're really going to talk about how AI hype and we can turn that into really usable solutions in CX automation. And we're joined by two folks, which I'll introduce shortly. But real fast on logistics, we're going to go through some really great talking points, use cases in industry around this topic. We'll have polls so we can engage the audience as we get perspective from the folks that are attending. And then we'll have a Q&A at the end. So as you guys are filling your questions, feel free to share it via chat and we will pull that up and we'll engage the room. And lastly, we'll share this recording back to everybody. And, if there's any additional follow-ups, love to connect people to the right people. So yeah, with that, we'll jump right in. Again, thank you everybody for attending. My name is Pete Lee, CRO at Zingtree. I've been in the CX AI space for multiple years, started my career in consulting. So seen it from both a transformation consulting standpoint all the way to deployment of software. And I'm joined by two folks really excited to share. So one is Whitney Smith from Sony. So Whitney, do you want to do a quick introduction?
Yeah, good morning, everybody. I'm Whitney Smith. I'm the Director of Customer Innovation for Sony Electronics North America. I oversee consumer service on the service platform. I've been in this space for a long time, and I have a passion for how do we make it easy for our customers? How do we build a customer-centric business that's technology forward and compliant and helps us reach our business goals? So I'm really excited to talk about this with you guys today, with Pete and Zeb, and I'm excited to be here.
And Whitney, I know you recently came back from Japan on a work trip. What was the most exciting thing about that trip?
Oh man, other than the fatty tuna sushi,
Oh,
it was really exciting to meet with my global coworkers and talk about what we're doing moving forward and how do we take solutions like AI and put them into our business to, contain calls, to engage our customers, and what does that look like in different regulatory environments like the US and Europe versus Asia Pacific. So it was a really exciting conversation.
awesome, amazing. And we're also joined by Zeb Jennings. Zeb is the CIO of eFinancial and Fidelity Life. So Zeb, you want to give a quick intro?
Yeah, absolutely. Good morning, folks. So yeah, I'm Zeb Jennings. I am the current CIO for eFinancial and Fidelity Life, and my work experience has been a lot on both the product and tech side, so driving technology strategy in order to meet product needs and business needs. I've spent my last 19 years in all highly regulated environments. So I started in bank card, then I moved to sports wagering. Now I'm in life insurance. So the totality of my career has operated under the guise of regulation and legal and laws. So uh, it's been a fun experience, operating in those spaces and figuring out how to be successful with both technology and business while still maintaining those regulations and staying within the lanes that have been set for us. No Japan for me, unfortunately. It is strategy season here in Chicago, so we are here in the office planning out the business and having the same conversations around how we're going to empower the business and some of the other verticals with AI tools, which deliver the value that they're looking for without ruining budgets or being a waste of time.
Well, Zeb, I guess so. Winter is coming in Chicago, so I guess the biggest risk you're dealing with is, how deep the snow is going to be in some of the months.
It snowed twice since I've been here already, so it's here.
Wow. Okay. Awesome. Well, again, thank you guys for joining. We'd love to have a topic. So, um, the first conversation point. So, obviously this really revolves around, obviously LLMs and GPT are the buzz out there. We're using it quite a bit. I think it's been, one of the most adopted consumer products, and obviously there's launching of a lot of generative AI projects, right? I think the perception out there is, um, some of these projects didn't go as well. I think obviously there's a huge excitement, and when GPT-4 came out, uh, people started using it and trying to tie it to CX. Obviously, in regular environments, there are some challenges if you don't use the right use cases. And I think the other challenge is, as we start thinking about AI, is you definitely need more structure and more deterministic approach, right? Which is, we'll talk more about it, but like how do you guardrail the experience to leverage your data, prevent hallucinations, and obviously prevent dead ends. So, the one thing I'll say before we kind of jump into dialogue and getting people's perspective on the AI landscape you know, LLMs in some ways, have been perceived as failing for CX. I guess I would challenge that by saying, are we using LLMs in the right way, right? Ultimately, LLM is a prediction engine. It's meant to give an answer. And so if you don't give it the right amount of context or intent, you're going to probably get the wrong answer. And so this is so critical as we think about the concept of guardrails is, how do we make sure that we provide the right context, the guardrails, the logic, the rules engine that allows the LLM to be able to produce the right results, right? And I think that's a learning that we have as we're all jumping into these technologies. And so I think I'll open up and get the perspective of Whitney and Zeb. Whitney, from a business operator, this space is huge. You got to be able to leverage it in a safe way. So what are your thoughts on this space and how your businesses have adopted to GPT and LLMs?
Yeah. So, here at Sony, we're pretty concerned with compliance and regulatory requirements. Our AI approval committee is made up of legal, compliance, our CFO, et cetera. So they are really governing kind of our future use of the tool. So when we look at it, we want to be able to access our knowledge base for the content for the LLM to learn from, but we want to make sure that whatever response it's giving is the right response and is legally compliant, be it about a repair for a TV or, a disposal of a battery. So that's become really important to us. So the way I've been really looking at it is, how do you take probabilistic AI, Gemini, ChatGPT, and add a deterministic orchestration layer, right? And collaborating with my compliance teams on defining what that needs to look like and like what are those guardrails. I think a lot of times in customer journey, we tend to stay in our lane, right? I'm in service. I work with the service team. I look at voice of the customer, when really we're approaching these projects as a cross-functional partnership across our company. Because not only do we need kind of the blessing of our compliance teams, but we need to work with, our version of Zeb to say, like, is this going to integrate into our systems in a way that's cost effective and also isn't going to take a full-time person to manage? So I'm looking at it from a compliance standpoint, a customer satisfaction standpoint, a staff management standpoint. Do we have the skills to manage this? And do we know what's happening in that endpoint that the customer's interacting with it?
Absolutely. And Zeb, I know in previous conversation, you talked about you're having these conversations with your business and financial counterparts daily. What are these conversations like? Is it education? Is it helping them understand the value? Like what from your IT perspective, what are you dealing with?
Yeah, so from an IT perspective, to me, everyone's a customer. It's the business, it's the actual customer, it's the regulator. So from our standpoint, because we are the integration point, everyone at some point in time will interact with my team, and we have this conversation. There's the general hype of AI, and the conversations are, we have to get this rolling, that we need to be a part of this, we can't get left behind, so how do we incorporate this into our business? And the conversations are highly focused on the education for these individuals, because they're dealing with vendors and they're reaching out and they're looking at business strategy and they're trying to find ways to speed things up and to grow the business. And they're talking to someone who's maybe using generative AI versus probabilistic or deterministic. And based on what they're trying to do, there's regulations against it. We have internal system constraints like data quality and where the access points are, and even things as simplistic as whether or not systems have APIs that are easily accessed by third parties, or do we restrict that internally? So I spend a lot of time explaining the difference between, deterministic AI, expert systems, RPA, probabilistic models, which are machine learning, which has just been rebranded as a type of AI, which it's always been an AI. If you go back and look, that's kind of been the case so far. And then really where generative fits in, and it does fit in within our industry, but the use cases are very specific, right? Development is a good example of where generative AI comes in and is what you want, right? It's generating code, it's making suggestions, it's learning, and you're giving it the ability to build something unique. And that's where you want a model like that. When you're processing do not contact requests or data subject access requests and things that have very distinct, ins and inputs and outputs, you can't have that variance. You can't allow there to be a difference, because if you don't do it, and you can be fined, you can be out of compliance, and there's just a lot of that happens. So each business vertical is looking to, move into the AI space or find ways for AI to assist them. And it's, my job and my team's job to make sure that we understand what the business case is, what are the success metrics, what are the KPIs, so we can make sure that they're using the right type of AI.
So Zeb, extending on and thank you for that. I think based on all the conversation that you have with business stakeholders, what are the biggest misnomers they have around AI that you have to sort of kind of reframe them to kind of think in the right way?
I think a lot of the times they see AI perform in a vacuum, right? They see greenfield development, they see POCs where the data is perfect, the environment is perfect, there's no stress, there's not a million customers trying to access the website. So they see this tool perform a function that they feel will really drive the business. And then you hit the reality of, that's not going to work. We don't have data in a format in order to train this model, or we don't even have access to this data to expose externally, or we're not willing to move this data outside of our ecosystem for them to use these things. And once the tool kind of hits a real world scenario, it just doesn't work, or it's slow, or the hallucinations, or the tool just doesn't perform like they were sold on. And that ends up being it. Is they look at these, they're like, oh, it's generative, it's doing all this stuff, we're gonna drive 10 times productivity in this quarter because we have this new awesome tool, only to realize, well, if you paid for that, you're not going to get any of that value, and then you just wasted the money on the project.
I think it's that old adage, if it seems too good to be true, it probably is. Right? A lot of the times when you're looking at demos, like you're saying, Zeb, right? You're looking at demos that are in clean environments that are just simple use cases, and you're like, wow, this is so easy. But then when you start to get the real world complexity, and again, like the definition of the guardrails, defining a confidence score, there's a lot of work that has to go into making sure that it's meeting the requirements that you need. And then again, it's an ongoing process of testing, looking at confidence scores, reviewing escalation data. So, I definitely think that that's true. I've experienced the same thing where, people come and say, look at this tool, it's so easy, we could just plug and play. And it's like, well, let's take a step back and really understand our requirements.
Awesome. Yeah, let's get to the first set of poll questions, and then let me launch the poll. So the first question is around, where has AI fallen short in your organization as we're kind of building these projects? So let me launch the poll. And we'll give the folks about a minute to answer. So I guess I don't know if Whitney and Zeb can see the poll. I think so. The questions are lack of trust, hallucinations, adoption, usability, performance, and lack of ROI, and all of the above. I think there will be a lot of all of the above, right? But Zeb, you talked about, I think, the ROI. That's a very critical piece, which is like you got to balance the amount of work it takes to potentially redo the integrations, make sure the data is correct to correspond to the actually ROI that you're going to get, right? Because then some of these GPT projects that have been launched without the proper understanding of ROI and business value, they just don't get to the results that you need, and then you can't get the resources to sort of back it up and be able to bring it to completion.
Yeah, there's a lot of components to generative that people don't realize or think about. Is you have to pay to train this model, and depending on how many data points and how much data, you're paying for that storage, you're paying for that compute. So the entire time that you're trying to get the model into a position to serve your purpose, you're absorbing the cost of that, and it's not cheap. And if you are not prepared to roll that out, and you don't know how it's exactly going to drive revenue or performance for your business, you always start off in the negative. So those particular types of projects, you don't realize how expensive they are. And a lot of the reasons they'll be stopped before then. They're like, oh, we spent way too much money and we're not getting anything out of this. And you have to be prepared to go through that and understand how you're going to turn it into value on the other side. Otherwise, you get the sticker shock, and it causes a lot of internal issues, and then you have issues with people backing the project any further simply due to that type of risk and loss of money.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure in the poll results, but Whitney, I would love your perspective. I know one of the challenges is always around adoption usability, right? Especially in CX, AI doesn't really matter unless somebody can use it properly, whether it's the end consumer or the agents using it. So how do you think about adoption usability when it comes to these new technologies?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, from where I sit in my organizations, Sony has long-term employees. So I'm going to add in here like legacy staff and staff that's not used to using these tools or implementing them, and that kind of being a constraint. I think for me, I really try to demystify AI and its possibilities by trying to inject it into their everyday work, trying to share use cases for our staff and our agents of like, here's some easy ways you can start to use generative AI, be it Microsoft Copilot, Gemini, just to get used to this idea that it's there and it's staying. I also like build in adoption plans into anything you're doing, right? You think you need one training? No, you need seven, right? 7 times, 7 ways. That's how you have to teach people and get them comfortable with it. I think from the other standpoint, again, like, coming back to guardrails and confidence scores, right? Being able to show that what the customer is experiencing is true and meets the confidence score helps your staff understand like this is a good thing for you. And here's how we can make you more productive. So I think that that's really important. Again, breaking down the barriers to everyday use of AI, then helping them see like here's certain areas of your business that we can look at to inject AI into that can give you more freedom and time to do other things that are more important. And then with agents, I think it's just like training, 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 getting them comfortable, following up on adoption, because I do think that's one of the hidden losses in ROI is, especially if you're putting this into a contact center, you put it out there and you hope it's going to work. And then when you're not seeing the use that you expected, you realize that maybe 75% of your agents haven't been adopting it at all. So how do you measure that adoption and continually give them trainings or spiffs, give them an award for using it? Like who's, making the greatest gains with it? Be creative.
Yeah, well, actually, Winnie, just to touch on that, I know obviously GPT is the most used consumer product as it was launched, and so do you see that? So I imagine majority of your agents or the customers that are using AI for Sony, they've experienced GPT in some ways, right? They've been using it in their personal life. Do you see that as being beneficial or a detriment when you try to bring that into the business world?
Yeah, great question. I think it's positive, especially from a staff perspective and internal adoption and internal excitement around the tools. I think there's this scary part where, especially employees are like, is this going to take my job? I'm going to, we're going to lose staff because of this. But then they start using it every day and they're like, oh, this is actually really useful just to help write an email. From a customer standpoint, thank you, Chat GPT and Google Gemini, for peeling off some of my volume because people are using that to help fix their TV versus calling my call center. But what I want to do is like take that and make sure that it's actually giving the right answer for your TV model. And that's where the guardrails come in. I think the more our consumers get used to using it, the better off we're going to be, especially from kind of like a chatbot standpoint. But I think we always have to acknowledge there is always going to be people that don't want to use it. So you need to continue to keep them in your mind about how do you service them just as, wonderfully as the customers that are using your AI tools.
Awesome. Yeah, so let's shift to the next set of topics. I think we kind of established that obviously there's a lot of potentially failed GPT projects, and that language models are a prediction engine. What's interesting as we look at complexity. Obviously, Whitney and Zeb, you guys both come from uber regulated complex environments. Multiple languages, all the way to multiple products, to all the way to multiple compliance and government rules you got to follow with GDPR and CCPA and other things, right? But ultimately, with more complexity, there's more variance because there's more nuance to the answer. And when we see that, picking the right use cases so that GPT is able to use the guardrails, we got to start thinking about how complex that we're addressing, right? Because ultimately, as issues get more complex, there's potentially more answers. And if GPT is meant to give an answer, potentially that's where it will hallucinate. And so when we personally think about guardrails, and obviously guardrails is, how do we have AI work within some boundaries, right? Some rule-based approach. Obviously with guardrails is all about being able to leverage the right context, right intent, being able to use things in GPT to control the confidence score, the parameters, and then be able to make sure that data, we're working off data and rules at the same time. So I guess Winnie and Zeb, I'll kind of open up to you guys. In your highly regulated environments, what's guardrails in your world to be able to ensure that the AI or the automation is performing to the rules that you guys are setting?
Yeah, from my side, for us, it's actually a pretty simple exercise these days because we ask the question, can this particular AI implementation be autonomous? Is it allowed to make its own decision? Can it determine what it wants? And can it learn from what it's doing? And a lot of the compliance and regulations around what we do, the answer is no. The answer is you take this data, you perform a specific action, you kick out a very specific response. And anytime that comes into the mix, it controls the type of AI that we use. As I said, there's use cases for all of them, and we do use all of the models, right? Machine learning is used to score leads and other things like that, where probability is what you want, and using confidence scores and things like that to guide it. We use generative in certain areas where it comes to the benefit is there in letting it encoding in some things like digital advisors, where we want it to behave like a person and talk to somebody. But a lot of what we do, a lot of requests from customers, and a lot of things like giving pricing quotes and talking about life insurance, that is very, very specific. So depending on the use case, and we start with that use case, is we ask that question. And if the question or the answer to that is no, we know that immediately comes off the table for us. So it allows us to focus on tools and AI variants that will serve that particular request.
Rather than forcing everything down the AI tunnel, you got to make sure that you have the right approach based on, again, the type of answer required, whether it's more complex or more deterministic or more regulatory minded.
Yeah, the funny thing about all of this is we're not really doing anything that's cutting edge. This is the same way you should approach any project, any tool, any software. What are your success metrics and your KPIs, and what are the regulations and requirements, and then make your decisions based off of that. It's getting through the hype and the confusion around what the different types of AIs can and cannot do. I think that it is what adds the unique flavor to what's going on right now.
Yeah, I like to always use the metaphor of, if you hired someone new on your team, right? That person comes with the skill set and the learning of why you hired them. They have internal knowledge. They've done things before, just like GPT, right? It knows things. It has the background. But now you got to teach that person how to do their job. You got to tell them, like, hey, you have free will to go answer these emails because you should know how to answer an email, right? Low risk. But when it comes to working through a contract negotiation, well, you actually need to meet all of these requirements per our legal team, and you need to meet with the risk department. You need to do all these steps. You need to tell them what to do, right? They're new to your organization. So, when you think about the use cases, and Zeb, I totally agree, right? You have low risk use cases where it's just pulling data, it's reading it from your knowledge base and giving the customer the answer. Versus, oh, I am dealing with PII. Oh, I'm dealing with complex information that, should it get it wrong, it puts me potentially in a legal risk situation. That is like a longer term use case that requires a lot more understanding and guardrails. So I think about guardrails as, I call it like a deterministic layer, right? So you have this probabilistic model, GPT, which has all the information to make the decisions, and then you have the output to the customer, be that internal or external. You need to put a layer in the middle that says, here's my rules, here's the things I want you to consider, and then here's how I score you on whether or not you followed those rules, right? Your confidence score. And the confidence score should be tied to the compliance risk or the legal risk, right? High compliance, high risk, legal risk, 95%. It should meet it every single time. And if it doesn't, it needs to escalate. And you need to record that You need to understand why it missed it so you can evaluate and retrain, update your guardrails, etc. Lower risk ones can have a little bit softer guardrails, maybe a lower confidence score. Low risk, hey, what are my hours at the contact center? Right? That's low risk. If someone gets it wrong, no big deal, they'll call back. So it's kind of like, again, like Zeb says, understanding like how much risk does each use case have. So when you're mapping out your use cases to do, you should be mapping out channel, risk, stakeholders to engage, and then be documenting all the guardrails you have currently and which ones apply to the use case. What's the confidence score, and how are you going to evaluate when it doesn't meet the confidence score?
Yeah, I think Winnie, you talked a little bit, I think, in our opener about if we treat GPT like a black box system where we can't actually impact the parameters, that's when it's going to hallucinate, right? I know you brought the term glass box. Maybe share your thoughts on how do you kind of open the kimono to make sure that you're actually engaging in these language models in the right way.
Yeah, so I think a lot of it is about doing consistent UAT testing always, right? Writing great guardrails, collecting the responses, which comes back to Zeb's point of the cost of data storage, right? You're storing all that data somewhere and then maybe using AI to go through it. So there's another use case. And then you're looking at what doesn't meet your confidence score. What was the answer that it gave? Why was it off? And what do you need to do? So you want to take it from a black box of, I don't know why it made this decision. Industry term is explainability. What's the explainability of the response? You want to use guardrails and a deterministic orchestration layer to move that to a glass box where you can be like, I know why it made this decision because I told it to use this document, I told it to consult this database, and then it gave the customer this answer. And if it didn't, that's when you need to be like, what's wrong? Is it in my data? Is there something wrong in my knowledge base? We need to go back and ensure that whatever is being fed into it and the guardrails is referencing is accurate, correct, and we need to make a change.
Love that. Yeah, so we'll move on to the next set of polls. So the question is, what is the biggest reason AI fails in customer support? And so let me launch the poll question. And so while we're, I think Winnie and Zeb, you guys can see the polls, but I know you guys kind of share your perspective, but what are your thoughts to this question?
Oh man, I think misaligned expectations from business stakeholders is a big one. You
Okay.
think we said, it's too good to be true. It probably is. You think you're going to deflect 90% of your calls when in reality, the customer might just be frustrated with your bot, right? I think that's a big one. Also, maybe not being diligent about the use cases you're releasing. So I think a lot of companies will throw everything out all at once, and then they have no idea what's working or not working. So being patient, releasing a few use cases at a time and measuring PDCA, plan, do, check, act, measuring whether they're working, seeing what's working, what's not working, adjusting, and then releasing more use cases kind of over time and managing those release cycles. Those have been two big ones that we've seen at our organization.
What about for you, Zeb?
For me, this question's always going to be in all of the above, no matter what the options are, because
Right.
there are far too many to really nail it down. But I would agree with what most of Whitney covered. From our side, depending on whether you pick the right model or not, but there's all types of things, data fragmentation and it not having access to the things it needs to do. Its decision boundaries are either too wide or too narrow to actually serve the purpose of the business. And then for those that are actually using, generative in their models, a lot of the times what's happening in the business and the market is changing faster than they can train their model. So we want to make a pivot. We want to start, offering this product or changing the way we do this. And it's not, if the model wasn't trained on that data, or if it wasn't trained on how to perform that action, you have to go through the training cycle all over again. So you have to retrain the model to operate under that. And so you either need to have really good planning and foresight on where the market's going and how you want to use that tool, or you just train it on a lot more open scenarios, which ends up costing you a lot more money. And if you don't end up using that scenario, it's wasted investment. So that's a lot of where I see generative having issues within companies. And on the use cases where it really works and where you're going, it's great. But if you want to be flexible and things are volatile in your market, it's going to be a problem handling the training of those models and making sure that all of those other components that Whitney discussed in this are in line, and that they're being trained and they're being monitored. So it just becomes more and more complex to make sure that you're serving the customer the way that you want to service them, or they're getting the support that they want from your company.
Well,
Yeah,
Zeb, I
and
think, oh, go ahead.
I was going to say that. So that made me think about, looking at the poll results. It didn't look like too many people chose the option of like connecting to the data. But I think one reason that a lot of these customer support ones fail is you're not ready. Your data's not ready, right? No, so many of us, this all happens so fast. Gen AI and these, kind of new AI use cases, that our knowledge bases and the data we have available was not built with an information architecture to train models. So I think we're trying, as business stakeholders, we try to balance that. Our CFOs, our CEOs hear AI, see AI, it's a shiny object on LinkedIn. They want it and they want it now, right? Where you should be patient and say, like, you know what, we really need to clean up our house first. So then that's where your use case kind of list comes in. What use cases do you have that require less structured data, that maybe are easily accessible to say, yep, we're going to be able to look up your order, right? And we can dip into this system in Salesforce and we can grab your order data and we can share it with you. Versus like I have a knowledge base of thousands and thousands of articles, but maybe they're not architectured correctly for that model to be trained on the priority of which one's which one it should use. And you need to build that into your runtime to have these successful customer support use cases go live, because your whole business has to adjust. It's not just your CX kind of tools and journey outward facing. Your internal systems, all the way back to how you're collecting and storing data, has to be ready to execute.
Yeah, absolutely. Data is going to be key, right? Data and the SOPs and the processes that are really the rules that bound the AI to perform in a certain way. Um, and just to, kind of move on to the third topic, which is around, AI for the actual use cases, right? And obviously, I think as we shared earlier, there could be multiple use cases, and picking the right use cases is absolutely critical. But if you think about like a very standard support layer where, you know, part of a support process is to gather information, verify the eligibility, investigate, escalate, issue the response, and then ultimately close the ticket. There's many ways that you can be thinking about leveraging AI in a more practical manner, right? But ultimately, you got to make sure that there's no easy button. There's not a one single way to solve it. But if you think about the AI layer, right, being able to summarize and help folks in the beginning of a conversation with support to be able to look at previous cases, that could be a very interesting use case. Data validation, helping, navigate the multiple processes to pick the right processes. A lot of what we can use AI for is there's a lot of different paths or variances of potential policies that you need to pick from, and where humans maybe will take too long or maybe make a mistake. That's where you could potentially leverage AI. There's obviously ways that you can leverage knowledge in a more meaningful way, all the way to leveraging AI to pick a next best action. And ultimately, if AI has the right parameters and the right guardrails, it can suggest the right action in the right meaningful way to the support base, to your customers and your consumers, all the way to doing some sort of recommendation and summarization. So, ultimately, finding the right use cases and applying AI in the right way is obviously going to be critical. And so, kind of shifting to Whitney again, you and Zeb, right? So, Whitney, as you kind of think about this space, what are some of the use cases that you're really thinking about that's going to be heavily adopted in the near future?
Yeah. So some of my low hanging fruit that we've seen success with, and that I think other companies are going to do, right, is simple voice of the customer analysis, right? You get thousands of surveys a month. What do they say? You don't need to read those. Put them into AI and have it tell you what it's about and recommend you changes, right? And you can follow up on those. That's a really kind of low hanging fruit there.
Right.
Obviously,
And there's some human in the loop, because then you can have humans
yeah,
assess the summary results so that you're not just having AI act independently. So that's a really safe
right.
way to
Exactly.
leverage AI.
Yep. So it's like, how do you give your staff more information in a way that you take away all this kind of time consuming work, and then they can get right to the heart of it? right? They can look at those results and decide what changes need to be made in the process. I think other low-hanging fruit that we're seeing a lot of places, and we're hearing it from every vendor, right, is like call summary, agent assist, etc. But when I look at a long term, I think that we're really going to be moving towards personalized experiences for customers, right? They want to have everything tailored to them, of their history with your company, what they need right now, and what they need down the road, right? Some things I'm thinking about is, how do I help people get a firmware update for their camera, like right when it comes out, right? That's one of the number one visited pages on my support site, is firmware updates for different camera models. So I want to be able to use AI to know, hey, I have this customer that has this camera. I have their device data. How do I push them a firmware text message and say, hey, it's
Right.
time to update your camera? So it's kind of like, I'm really looking at personalization, and then the internal workforce. We're the last generation of people, they're going to manage only people. So how do we look at internal agentic technology to support low hanging, admin work, to allow for people to do better work, and again, do the heart of what's happening in CX? And that's looking at the customer journey and taking it forward.
I'm laughing at as you state that, because if you think about like something as straightforward as a firmware upgrade, that a firmware upgrade may be perceived very differently from somebody who is technical and engineer to maybe a kid the first time they bought the product, all the way to somebody that have never used the product. And so that personalization is absolutely critical, because you need to be able to have them understand the content that you're sharing with them, or meet them where they are to be able to support the product.
100%. And that comes back to one of my favorite, like, important points is cross-functional collaboration, right? You need to be taking, if you're in a service or a support, platform, you need to be collaborating super tightly with your marketing team, with your customer data team, to understand, like, what do you know about that customer? What can you legally and compliantly use to service them and communicate with them? So bring in your compliance friends and your legal friends, right? And then how do you access that data? Head over to Zeb's office in IT and ask him, like, hey, I want to connect this in this database. How do I do that in order to service this personalization engine? And so really, as a business owner, you need to start understanding what world your cross-functional stakeholders are living in, what's important to them, what do they have available to them, and how do you guys work together? Because that's the only way companies are going to be able to move forward with large-scale projects.
And then Zeb, just a question for you. So as businesses are coming to you with these projects, obviously you're kind of balancing performance and speed of value for business when with the real world, which is regulatory compliance, all of those things, right? Can I get you the data? Can I have access to the data? Do I need to rebuild the system? All of these things you're thinking about. How can business be better prepared when they're engaging you and IT in generality, so that you guys so they can get approved? What can they do to be more proactive?
What I find interesting about this is, I think you can prepare to a certain point, but regulations change, laws change, compliance changes. So I feel it's more about a partnership. It's more about having a regular cadence with them, understanding what they're thinking about and where they're going. So you can look internally at your system and say, yeah, this data is already available, or hey, I know this data is guarded. They're not going to be able to get this. How would I handle this situation? So I think having a continuous stream of conversations and being good, partners between IT and business is what they can do to be the most successful. Because if you wait until you have a project and you're ready to go and you have this idea and then you bring this to me or my team, it's going to start an entire cycle on our side, right? We have to put it through the compliance roles. We have to look at what you want. So there can be variations in how long it takes us to deliver, or whether we can even deliver it. And if you've moved too far down that path, you may have wasted too much time, or more time than you wanted to. So having regular sessions where you're talking about where you see this going, where they see the tech going, and I'm sure we'll get into some more of this here in a little bit. But that's where we start to handle things like tool sprawl, and I know Whitney mentioned an orchestration layer, and it really is how things are happening as you scale, right? You're going to start seeing things like model gardens and agentic systems and these orchestration layers, because there's not going to be one tool or model that solves the problem. You're going to need to be able to well, this model has a particular bias, which isn't going to work well with this particular type of use case. So we need to be able to choose this model, or we need to be able to use a machine learning model, or we need to be able to just use one of our internal, expert systems, which is basically just workflows. For anyone that doesn't know, an expert system is what I call an RPA system with soul. It's basically able to make decisions within a workflow as opposed to just following steps. And having all of that prepared, so as you're discussing it, you can go, okay, well, this is the type of data they want, meaning here's the models that they can use, here's the tools that we have access for them, and just keeping that communication channel open, because things are going to change on both sides. The business is going to change, the market's going to change, regulations are going to change, new laws are going to be passed or struck down. So it's about constantly knowing where the organization's going, so IT can have infrastructure to support.
So
Yeah,
Zeb,
and
I was going to say, Whitney, real fast, Zeb, the more you talk about it, the more like you could replace AI with cloud a couple years ago to mobility a couple years ago, right? It's all the same. You got to be able to collaborate, you got to be very open-minded and flexible. There's a lot of changes to the technology, probably even faster than it was before. But also in your world, there's a lot of changes to policy. So you also need to be very nimble, because 2026 is right around the corner, and there could be brand new policies you got to deal with, right? And maybe AI won't be the right application. You might want to be more rules based. So in the end, it's still the same. You got to be able to collaborate between two sides, business and technology.
Right. It's the same, as I said earlier, it's the same thing that you would do with any kind of project. The only difference is AI empowers speed. You can do these things faster, and things are changing faster now that AI is out there. So that collaboration needs to be tighter than maybe it had been. Maybe you meet with your people once a month or once a quarter. You might have to start shrinking those windows in order to stay ahead of things, because that's how fast things are moving now.
yeah, I was going to say, when you're in an innovation seat, there is inherent tension with compliance teams, right? Because you want to be on the bleeding edge and they want you to be safe, which aren't always the same thing. So, as a business stakeholder, it's key to do the professional development, to understand that you need patience, to understand what InfoSec and IT and legal cares about, and to come to the table to collaborate instead of being frustrated. Because
Right.
you may feel that you're being held back as a business stakeholder, being like, oh my gosh, you're making me jump through all these hoops, right? But really, they're doing it for the good of your company. And because if you don't do those things and your project ends up costing the company a ton of money in legal fees or issues, that's on you, not on IT. So it's about building those relationships with the Zebs in your office, having an open mind as a business stakeholder to what they care about, and knowing that they're on your side, even if there's kind of tension around how long things sometimes take.
So Winnie, I was just thinking about, because you're in San Diego, like business wants to go surfing, but IT will say, you know what? Are you sure there's no jellyfish or sharks in the water that's
Yeah.
gonna? I mean, they care about your safety, right? So I think it's that balance and relationship that matters. I know we're kind of approaching in. I'm going to skip the last poll question because I think we already moved this. It kind of moves. There's a couple interesting questions in the chat that I want to engage the room, but just to have a final quote, right? I think this is a great one that our marketing team found, which is, AI will not replace humans, but those who use AI will replace those who don't, right? Ultimately, if you again, I'll add that, use AI in the right way, in the right use cases, in the right practical manner. I know one of the questions that came across chat that was kind of interesting. I want to engage, I think, a couple of folks, right? So one is maybe Zeb, this is for you, and I know you talked about APIs integrations, but how do you manage the sprawling demand of integrations? Obviously, a lot of this AI would be dependent on how you connect different systems. So how do you kind of manage through that?
It's a big issue, right? Tool sprawl and tech sprawl has been a problem for a long time. It'll continue to be a problem far into the future. So, it goes back to kind of what we were just talking about. It's understanding the strategy of the business and finding tools that serve, you know, multiple areas or have scalability in them, right? You pick up a tool where you can build agents, and it has access to different data sources, so I can use it for different business verticals. And there will be some times that certain business verticals are so niche that a generalized tool won't work, and that's where you make an exception. So in our world, when we evaluate a tool, the first thing we ask is, do we already have something that can do this? Do we already have something that we can build on that will solve this problem? So we don't allow the addition of new tools without, a deep technical review and an understanding of what they're trying to do with it, especially in the AI world now, right? Everyone has, in their organization, or most do, maybe not everyone, but you have access to Chat GPT or Copilot, and you have all of these functions that these individuals can, already access, and it's popping up in all of the tools. So, you know, controlling the things you bring in is vital. You have to look at what business goal, and if it's, hey, we want to add this tools to do this one very, very slim thing, you have to ask yourself, is the ROI there? Is it worth the tech integration? Is it worth the support? And from our side, that's how we kind of stop that sprawl. Is everything has to be evaluated against our system. It has to be evaluated against our business strategy and our IT strategy to make sure that we're not adding cost and bloat. And a lot of it's cost, right? It's every time you add a new tool and a new vendor, it's not just what you're paying the vendor, it's integration, it's maintenance, it's time that's being taken away from the development teams now to maintain this product, which now means they're splitting attention between multiple verticals. So now we're working in parallel, which slows down productivity, and that's where you get into the, hey, this takes too long versus we want to go fast.
Yeah, and then the other question, I know Winnie and Zeb, you guys both come from larger companies. One of the questions asked, and I can maybe rephrase this, right? So are there big differences coming from incumbent larger companies? In this question, they're stating banks versus like the newer companies who are, maybe a little more agile, more cloud centric. I guess have you guys seen in your environment? Are you guys moving slower than the modern companies, or do you guys feel that you guys can still be very nimble?
I'll go first. We move slow, right? Sony is a battleship, and turning it takes a whole team, right? So we look at it that, again, the tension of, I'm an innovation leader. I want to move fast. I want all of this yesterday, right? Because I see it out and I'm like, wow, this is so cool. Look at the opportunity. But then my boss brings me back to earth and says, small wins first, right? And then they lead to big wins. I think that, in a professional opinion, a company that's maybe smaller, coming out of their startup phase, et cetera, their systems might be more ready for AI. Kind of what I talked about before, where you have legacy data that's been around for 10, 20 years. It's not ready. You can't use it. You got to do an information architecture project before you can, set it up to train a model. But those companies that maybe were already cloud forward, had some of these, data structures in place, they might be able to move faster, just even from a model training perspective. But I think no matter what, you have to come back to the risk, right? Larger companies often have more risk, right? They're more visible, lots more consumers. They might have certain products that are more provisioned by consumer protection laws, right? That's a big one for us, is around consumer protection laws. So it just really depends, I think, on your industry. But I think no matter what, every business has risk. So you just need to be able to manage that risk to the extent that it makes sense for your business.
Got it. I know we're approaching time, so I guess one final takeaway for Winnie and Zeb. So what is one piece of advice that you want to give a leader who's trying to scale AI responsibly in their organization? Like, what is that one advice that you would give them? And Zeb, I'll start with you.
So for me, I think it's, making AI part of your operational excellence or operational procedures. It's not a magician. It's not a checkbox to solve a problem. It needs to be a part of the processes that you've followed all of this time. You need to pick the right model. You need to have business cases. You need to check against the rules and compliance. And it needs to be part of what you do for the rest of the time in your organization. You need to be consistent. You need to follow this pattern. And, if it's what Whitney said, if it's too good to be true, it is very likely the case, right? It's and it's not a, oh, well, we'll use AI to solve a compliance problem, right? That's not how you should be looking at it. You should be looking at it like, how do we drive results? How do we drive productivity? How do we keep costs down? You need to focus on things that are just core business steps as you grow as an organization, and that's how it becomes a part of your business. You test in real world environments, you test in production, you run those POCs in realistic scenarios to make sure that it's going to be what you need it to be for your business, and not think of it as the genie in the bottle that's going to grow and magically make you a bunch of money or save you a bunch of money, because it's not. It's going to fail and it's going to cost you money, and then nobody's going to want to do it again after that.
Yeah, totally agree with that, Zeb. You don't want a failed project, because then everyone will point to it about why you can't try it again. I would say my advice would be, again, be patient and do your homework, right? If you're an innovation leader, maybe you're not technical. I can't code, but you know what? I learned, what are the questions I need to ask? What do I need to do during UAT? What matters in this, world, right? Get educated on how it works technically. Even if you're not the AI engineer, try to understand, and then teach your staff, right? You have business stakeholders who are bringing these ideas to the table. You want to teach them how to vet these things, right? Because they come to you being like, I saw this really great tool. And you're like, okay, well, great. Let's talk about, how do you set up guardrails in it? What kind of data storage is happening? What's the data retention policy? What's their relationship with OpenAI, right? You want to train them on what questions to ask so that everybody knows how to evaluate the opportunity before you go to your new best friends over at IT and InfoSec and legal to talk about it, because you want to make their jobs easier. Because the second part of the advice is, again, cross-functional collaboration. Educate yourself. What matters to your other business stakeholders who are helping you implement these projects? And that is what's going to help you be a holistic, innovative leader who can successfully implement AI.
Awesome. I know we're well past time, but this has been such a great conversation. Whitney and Zeb, thank you so much for joining. I hope the folks really got the most out of this session. And again, we'll be sharing this to everybody that attended. And we're happy to have further discussions after that. Again, everybody have a great day. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.